I'm going to get started. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for coming this evening to the conversation about Financial Aid 101. Over the past few weeks, we've really taken a look at different ways that we can research colleges. We've looked at different types of colleges out there, from public to private to community. We've talked about ways that your student can assess if a school is a good match academically or socially for them. And today, what we're going to focus on is the aspect of financial fit. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I am Amber Thompson, and I live in the Los Angeles area, and I'm an independent educational consultant. And what that means I do is I help students and families with the college application process. And I'm always very honored to be part of a student's journey to college. And my main goals are always to minimize the stress of this particular experience and to really emphasize all of the excitement and all of the potential outcomes that a student can have when they are exploring different colleges. All right, so tonight we're going to have a couple of goals. We're going to learn how to fill out the FAFSA. We're going to learn about differences between the FAFSA and a whole nother financial aid form that you might need to fill out, the CSS Profile. We're going to take a look at the importance of expected family contribution, as well as the cost of attendance of schools. We're going to look at how schools meet your demonstrated financial need. And we're also going to learn about the importance of creating a financially balanced college list. This won't be a conversation about how to specifically pay or save for college, as I'm not a financial advisor. My role, however, is to help you understand the process of applying for aid, to learn about how aid is awarded differently by different colleges, and also the importance of your student having affordable college options on their list. All right, so goal number one, filling out the FAFSA. Here we go. All right, key features of the FAFSA. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. I want to emphasize that it is free always to fill out and submit. The FAFSA is a student document, and that's going to come up in just a moment, as being very important. And you fill it out every year that you want to apply for aid. So why apply? The FAFSA actually is the main tool for determining a student's eligibility to receive and apply for federal student aid, including grants, loans, and work study. It is used by states to provide state grant money, and it is used by individual colleges to assess financial need and award institutional funds. The FAFSA looks at three major funding sources to assess a family's ability to pay for college. It takes a look at your past earnings, which are your savings. It takes a look at your present earnings, which are your paychecks, basically. And it looks at your future earnings, and that is your ability to take out loans and to repay them in the future. And I'll be honest, this last piece was a revelation to me when I learned that the formula was essentially assessing my family's future capacity to pay back loans if I needed to take those out to help pay for my students' education. So that was really something that I did not know the first time around. So step one of filing for the FAFSA is creating your FSA ID. And this is basically your username and password that is linked to your legal name, your birth date, and your social security number. And both the student and at least one parent must create their own federal student aid ID. And you keep this same ID for your whole life. Even if you're a student and you wind up going to grad school, you'll still use the same FSA ID that you created when you were a senior in high school. And you use this ID to sign your FAFSA when you're ready to submit it, as well as to complete any loan documents if you choose to actually take out loans later on. Some keys to remember with this is that I want you to always use an email you plan on keeping for a long time. So do not have your students use their school email address because those do disappear once they graduate from school. So you want to make sure that they're using an email address for backup purposes if they need to recover their ID or anything like that. And also, when you create your FSA ID, you need to know that it's going to take a couple of days, 1 to 3, in order to process your ID. And once that duration of time is over, you will receive an email when your ID is ready for use. So I think a lot of people think they can just sit down and fill out the FAFSA in one day. However, this particular step needs to happen first before you can move on to the rest of the form. All right, so step number 2, and there's a lot of information here. And tomorrow I'm going to send out a resource sheet that's going to provide some excellent resources about this. But step 2 is really to get your documents ready. So before you sit down in front of your computer and you're all ready to type it in, you want to make sure that you have access to all of this information. So you want to make sure you have your social security numbers, so you're inputting those correctly, driver's license. You do need your federal tax information. And I want to explain very carefully about which year you're going to use. And so I'll use this year's current seniors as an example. So our current seniors will be applying for college in fall of 2021. And so the tax information that you will need to put in onto your FAFSA this year will be prior year. So we're going to take 2021 and we're going to back it up 2 years, and we wind up with your 2019 tax documents. So those are the ones that you are going to need when you sit down to fill out your FAFSA. You will also need information on your cash, savings, and checking account balances, essentially all your liquid investments. If you have investment real estate, you'll need that. But I want to emphasize here that the FAFSA does not take into account your primary residence. So it doesn't look at home equity in the house that you live in at all. If you happen to own a business or a farm that has over more than 100 employees, it takes a look at that. It also asks you about any educational savings accounts, such as 529s, as well as your tax-deferred retirement contributions. And that last one, I want to make an important point about. The FAFSA does not take into consideration how much you have saved for retirement, but it does ask for information about how much you contributed in that particular year. The FAFSA also takes into account the number of dependents in your household. So they do look at your whole household size. They take a look at the number of students you have in college. They do also take note of the age of the oldest parent in the household. And they also check out the state that you live in, because they do acknowledge that some states are more expensive to live in than others. So once you've gathered all your documentation, you are then ready to sit down and fill out the FAFSA. And I want you to always remember that you need to start at FAFSA.gov. And I emphasize this because there are some inaccurate websites out there, and they will often sort of try to trick you that you need to pay to submit the FAFSA. So this goes back to my comment earlier that it is always free to submit the FAFSA. So if you start at the FAFSA.gov site, you'll be in the right spot, and it will be free to submit this documentation. You always want to log in using your student's have the student log in using their FSA ID. I emphasized before that the FAFSA is a student document, and that is why you're logging in with their ID. We just talked about using prior year tax information. Number 4 is all about making sure that you are putting the student information into the student section and the parent information into the parent section. The FAFSA takes a look at student assets and income a little bit differently than parent assets and income. So you want to make sure that you're putting that information in the correct spot. Number 5 is all about using a handy tool that is called the IRS data retrieval tool. And this is really a huge time saver. So if you filed your taxes, you will be able to link them automatically into the FAFSA and have it auto-populate the necessary fields. Now, I do always encourage you to double check the entries. and know that not every single field gets populated over, but it really is a huge time saver. And I have never once read anything bad about the IRS data retrieval tool. So please feel comfortable in using that. You want to make sure that you're sending it to all of the schools that you are applying to. Now, initially, you can submit the FAFSA to 10 schools, but if you're applying to more than 10 schools, there is a way to then go back and send the FAFSA to additional schools. You simply wait until the FAFSA has been submitted and you get an email about that. And then you can go back in and pretty much take out some schools that you already sent the information to and then add new schools. And if you need to do this, you could always reach out to me to ask, but you can also just always Google how to add more than 10 schools on the FAFSA. And there's a direct link that'll come up from the government to explain how to do that. Number 7 is a tad quirky because some states out there want you to list the schools that you're applying to in a particular order. So in order for you to receive or be eligible to receive state aid in certain states, they want to be listed first on your list. So they want to make sure that you have a public institution from that state at the top of your FAFSA list. I know many of our people are from California here tonight. And in California, you simply have to list an eligible in-state college to be considered for state grant aid, but it doesn't matter which order you list them on for the state of California. But tomorrow, if you live in another state, I'm going to make sure I send out a link so you can check to see if your particular state is one of those that wants the #1 spot to be one of their state institutions. Number 8 is simply to sign the FAFSA. So many times people take that, go through all the trouble of submitting or putting in all the information, but then they forget that last step of signing it. And so they never submit it. So that is a key step. Number 9 is all about keeping track of school deadlines that exist. And oftentimes a good rule of thumb is that the financial aid documents are due pretty similar to when the regular or the early decision is for the school you're applying to. However, that is not always the case. So I always encourage families to double, triple check to make sure that you're submitting the financial paperwork on time by the deadlines that each specific school is asking for. So just find out what your earliest school is, submit by then, and then you'll be all set for the subsequent deadlines. And number 10 is simply all about reading the definitions carefully and using the help features that are on the website. There really are a lot of those helpful little pop-up bubbles or information boxes that can help explain if you're uncertain what a particular term is. All right, so 4 of the biggest FAFSA mistakes that I wouldn't want any of you guys to make. Number 1 is not filling out the form because you assume you won't qualify. Data consistently shows that many people who are most eligible for need-based aid actually never submit the FAFSA. So please submit your FAFSA. Another mistake is not filling out the form for freshman year and then trying to submit the FAFSA in later years. There are many institutions out there who simply will not allow you to submit a FAFSA for a couple of years if you don't apply for aid in that freshman year. Another big mistake is that sometimes people list their 529 educational savings plan as a student asset, but it is a parent asset. That is what the government has decided, that 529 plans need to be qualified as a parent asset. And the 4th is simply not calling the financial aid office when you have questions. I want to reiterate, and I will reiterate a couple of times throughout this presentation, that you as the parent and as the student always have the right to call the financial aid office and ask them questions whenever you have a concern or there's something you don't understand and you just want some guidance. They are truly there to help you and to be of service to you. All right, so you've gotten all of your information. You've submitted the form, you've pressed submit, you've signed the FAFSA. What happens next? So 3 to 5 days later, your SAR will arrive, and this is your student aid report. And this is a critical document for two prime reasons. First, it allows you to double check all of the data that you've submitted. And if you need to input any corrections, you can do that if you need to. And the biggest one is that it provides your EFC in the upper right-hand corner. Now, what's your EFC? Your EFC is your expected family contribution. This is the amount of money that the federal government and the college expects your family to contribute to the cost of education. This figure is recalculated each and every year when you submit the FAFSA. And I want to make a point here that it is often higher than families anticipate, and it is often more than they believe that they can afford. All right, so we're going to get back to the importance of the FAFSA, of the EFC in just a few minutes, but I want to take a look at the differences between the FAFSA and another financial aid form that you may need to fill out for particular schools. So most schools use the FAFSA to determine your EFC. However, there are approximately 170 schools that are mostly highly selective institutions, as well as some flagship public institutions that ask you to fill out the CSS profile. And the profile is similar to the FAFSA in that it is used to assess your eligibility for institutional aid for grants, scholarships, and loans. So it has a very similar purpose, but I'm going to show you a few key ways that it's different. The CSS profile, if you can tell right here, looks at a lot more information than the FAFSA. There are a few key things I want to point out here. First, the CSS profile does take into account your home equity. It also takes into account if you have any, extraordinary medical costs or medical spending accounts. It will ask you if you have childcare costs or perhaps a sibling's private K-12 school tuition. It does ask you also to, estimate current year taxes. It does, in addition, look at your total retirement savings, which the FAFSA does not ask for. Now, both of these still, however, do not count your total retirement savings into any of their calculations. But the CSS profile will ask you to let them know how much you have saved for retirement. The CSS profile also cares about any small businesses with fewer than 100 employees that you might have under your name. So really, it's looking at your financial health from a much more comprehensive view. Oh, I also wanted to note that the CSS profile, because it is so much more comprehensive, also allows you to input if you have any special circumstances. So there's a whole text box that you can use to explain any extraordinary situations related to your finances that you might have. So the FAFSA does not include any type of information for you to tell your story, but the CSS profile does allow that. The CSS profile also looks at more family members, and this is really important and a key distinction if there is, if your student is living, with a divorced family. For the FAFSA, if students' parents are divorced, the FAFSA only looks at the custodial parent, and if that custodial parent is remarried, then the step parent's finances are considered as well. And the custodial parent is defined as whomever the student lives with the majority, at least 51% of the time. The CSS profile, however, looks not only at the custodial parent, but also the non-custodial parent and the members of their respective households. So the CSS profile can actually ask for financial information for up to 4 parents if that is your particular family situation. Another key distinction is that the FAFSA formula is fixed. So the federal government is responsible for the algorithms, the formulas that go into figuring out your family's EFC for college. The CSS profile, however, collects a lot more information, and then each individual school will examine your financial data differently. Now, some will consider that home equity that you had to input, and others do not consider it. And it can be very challenging to guess the formulas that they use. And again, you could always make a call to the financial aid office to clarify. So really, truly, your family's individual financial situation is key in determining which one of these formulas might be more advantageous to you, since so many different factors are taken into consideration. And if you'll note, when we talked about the FAFSA, after you submit it, a little less than a week after that, you'll receive a big documentation that lists your family's individual EFC. So you're going to find out from the government how much your expected family contribution is. With the CSS Profile schools, though, you do not get any additional documentation like that. So you might not know your end EFC until you're looking at a financial aid award letter when your student is getting their admissions acceptance letters. However, there are some tools to help you predict how much money you might be eligible to receive at these colleges. So calculators are out there to help families estimate their EFC, especially when if you're looking at some of the CSS Profile schools. And all you need to do is simply Google the college name and net price calculator. And every college is required by federal law to have a net price calculator on their website. However, not all net price calculators are created the same. There are some really poorly designed ones out there. Essentially, if the net price calculator is asking you more and more questions, that's a good sign that you're going to get a better accurate estimate as to what that institution might be able to provide your family financially. And it's key to remember that these are always just estimates. They're not your official financial aid award, but they can be very helpful tools in helping figure out which schools are financially affordable for your student. And tomorrow I'm going to make sure that I send out the awesome link from the College Board that has all of the different calculators out there that you can use to estimate both federal and institutional EFC. In past presentations, I have mentioned that there used to be a tool that the federal government sponsored. So perhaps you have a younger student and you're not yet filling out the FAFSA this year and you want to take a look and get an estimate. There used to be a FAFSA forecaster tool, but they literally disabled that at the end of September. So now we have to go to the College Board EFC calculator tool, and that will help provide estimates for both the federal and the institutional EFCs that you might get from a CSS Profile school. Okay, so we've talked about different ways to assess your expected family contribution. Now what I want to take a look at is the cost of attendance of certain schools, and then we're going to figure out how these numbers actually mesh together and are very important for your family to know when you're creating a college list. All right, so cost of attendance, this is another acronym. It's often referred to as COA, so cost of attendance. And every college publishes its annual cost of attendance, which includes tuition, room and board, books and supplies, transportation costs, miscellaneous living expenses, your students' Saturday night sushi obsession. And you find cost of attendance simply by Googling college name plus cost of attendance, and you are going to get a list. And we're going to take a look at a couple of examples here. I do want to encourage you to try to find the most current year. Sometimes the initial Google search will come up with something from 2017. And literally every year, college tuition and room and board costs generally increase. So do try to observe whether or not you're looking at the most current information available. Okay, so when we take a look in a minute at our different cost of attendances from various colleges, we're going to see two different types of costs. We're going to see direct costs, and these are things such as tuition and room and board. These are costs that are going to be charged directly to you, the family, and they're consistent across the board. Indirect costs, however, change based on perhaps a student's major, based on where they live. So a student could have, one student could have very different book, supply, and transportation costs from another student. And every student might have, different personal expenses depending on the lifestyle they would like to lead while they are at college. So the indirect costs truly vary, whereas direct costs are very consistent no matter who the student is. All right, so here we go. We have two cost of attendance sheets here from UCLA and University of Arizona. And there are a few things I want to draw your attention to help you read these when you're looking at them in the future. First, you'll see some of those direct costs, such as tuition and fees that I mentioned on here. And then you'll also see the indirect costs. And these are always estimates based on just student averages for books and supplies and transportation and personal. And you'll also see that there are different columns based on whether or not a student is choosing to live on campus. So UCLA has it in their residence halls. Then they have a whole separate column for if you're living in an off-campus apartment. And then they have a whole nother column if you're living with relatives. And you can see how factors such as room and meals are going to vary depending on where you're living. Another key thing to note in these, especially if you're looking at perhaps an out-of-state public institution, are the price differences for in-state residents versus non-residents. So if you take a look at the UCLA section, you'll see a total California resident living at UCLA will pay just under $37,000. However, if you happen to be a non-resident student coming to UCLA, that fee is going to be in excess of $66,000. So there's a nearly $30,000 difference in the tuition charge that a non-resident student is paying. And University of Arizona, you will see similar columns for Arizona resident versus non-resident, and similarly a tuition hike, quite a significant tuition hike if you are out of state. All right, now let's take a couple look at a few private institutions. Both of these are in the state of California. There aren't going to be any non-resident fees in a private school because they don't charge differently based on your state of residence. Loyola Marymount happens to be a campus where more students perhaps commute in and out of, so you will see more on-campus, off-campus with parent or relative options in a field, in a chart like this. Claremont McKenna, however, is primarily a residential campus, so it's pretty rare for Claremont McKenna students to live off-campus, so they don't even have different fields of information for living off campus. And you probably note that the average cost of attendance for these private schools are significantly higher than your public institutions. Okay, so we've taken a look at how to figure out your expected family contribution, and we've taken a look at where to find cost of attendance of the schools. So these are our two big numbers that we are dealing with, and they are wonderful predictors of how much a school is actually going to cost you. So let's take a look at how we're going to figure out how a lot of students very rarely pay the sticker price at colleges. So let's take a look at how that works. All right, there is a formula that drives it all, and this is how your financial aid or your need for financial aid is calculated at a school. They are going to take the big cost of attendance, so the big number that it's going to cost for you to go to that particular school, and they're going to subtract that expected family contribution, so that amount of money that all of the FAFSA and the CSS Profile said you could afford to pay, and then they're going to come up with a figure called your financial need, your demonstrated financial need. Okay, I've got a couple student examples here to walk you through this. So we have two students, Martha and Jeremy, and they are both, this is a figure for UC San Diego here, and both Martha and Jeremy are good old California kids, so going to an in-state school. Martha has an expected family contribution of $20,000. So if we take a look at that cost of attendance of over 33 and we subtract the 20,000, Martha has a demonstrated financial need of $13,270. So that's the amount of money that Martha needs in order to be able to go to UC San Diego. Jeremy, on the other hand, has a much lower expected family contribution of $8,000. So his demonstrated financial need, the amount of money Jeremy needs to go to UC San Diego, is $25,270. All right, so these kids have need. Where's this money coming from? That's what we're going to take a look at. Goal number 4, how schools meet your demonstrated financial need. Okay, so there are basically 2 main ways that schools do this. And the first way that they usually apply for first is self-help aid. So schools are going to figure out how you can help yourself fund your college experience. And that is primarily going to be through loans, is going to be the first thing that a student is going to be offered. And that is money that must be repaid. So it's money you take out, the government gives you a loan, and you then go off and go to school, and you don't need to pay these loans back, until after graduation. Another form of self-help aid is federal work study. And we're going to explore that a little bit more. And the next big category is gift aid. And this is what we all love because this is free money that you don't need to repay. So this comes in the form of grants, scholarships, often merit aid is deemed gift aid. So we're gonna break down these 2 different main categories for financial funding. Okay, I know there's a lot on this screen. There are essentially 2 types of federal loans. So when you've completed your FAFSA, the FAFSA will let you know whether or not you are eligible to receive direct subsidized loans. And if you have demonstrated need, you can qualify for a subsidized loan. And the beauty of a subsidized loan, essentially, is that the government is paying the interest on these loans while you are enrolled in college. However, if you don't qualify for a subsidized loan, you can always take out an unsubsidized loan as long as you submitted your FAFSA. Even if you don't have any financial need, you can still take out a direct unsubsidized loan. This year, the current rate for an unsubsidized loan is simply 2.75%. So the interest rates on these loans are generally quite low, and they're historically low right now. The main difference is that with an unsubsidized loan, the student is responsible for any interest that accrues while they are earning the degree. So that's really the main difference. Subsidized loan, the government's paying your interest, and an unsubsidized loan, you are responsible for paying that. All right, so how much can you actually take out through the federal loan program? As you can see here, there are actually different loan amounts that you can take out each year, as well as different maximum subsidized amounts that a student would be eligible to receive. Now, if a student took out the entire amount of loans for the entire duration of their 4-year undergraduate career, they would have a max loan amount of $31,000, and that could possibly be $23,000 of that at the subsidized level. Okay, so the school is first going to try and meet your demonstrated need by seeing if they can give you a loan. So perhaps offering you, would you like to take out an unsubsidized or subsidized loan, depending whether or not you qualify for that subsidized loan. So that's really their first go-to. Their second go-to is usually federal work study. And again, eligibility for this is based on financial need and is based on the information that you've put into your FAFSA. Typically, students who are eligible to do federal work study earn about $2,000 to $3,000 a year. They might be expected to work 6 to 10 hours a week, and this is generally a job that's on campus, and the student's responsible for finding that job. But usually the school does a really good job of connecting work study students with work study opportunities. Now, the amount that a student would receive on their financial aid award letter, it's not a guaranteed amount, it's simply an earnings limit. And the money that the student is earning during their work study job is paid directly to the student. So oftentimes, this is money that would go towards perhaps some of those indirect costs of maybe books, supplies, those miscellaneous student expenses that come up, transportation. For students who demonstrate exceptional financial need, they might be eligible for the federal Pell Grant program, and this is money that does not need to be repaid. If you do receive a Pell Grant, the maximum award last year was just over $6,300. Not all students actually qualify for that full amount, and sometimes you'll see, sort of staggered amounts depending on your eligibility. And again, this is based on your submission of the FAFSA each and every year. There are also state grant programs, and I mentioned those up in the FAFSA portion. And basically, many states also offer special grant programs for their residents. So for those residents who decide to go to a school in state. Some of them do have separate applications and deadlines depending on your state of residence. For our California guests tonight, I do know that the California deadline to apply for the Cal Grant, which is the California State Grant Program, is March 2nd. And filing the FAFSA is often part of this process of applying for state grant money. So the two are usually very intrinsically linked. Okay, so the school has now figured out all the different ways they can help you help yourself in the financial funding process here. So they've checked out if they can give you a loan. They've checked out if you're eligible for a Pell Grant. Perhaps you're eligible to receive financial aid or federal work study. However, sometimes students have an even larger need than that, especially when we're looking at some of these private schools. So that is when we turn to scholarships and grants. And again, these are awarded usually after the school has offered you the loans and the work study. And this is our gift aid. This is money that comes directly from the schools and does not need to be paid back. And it's always key to note if the scholarships have different applications to fill out or if there are separate deadlines. Very often, when you submit your application, you are then eligible for any scholarship or grant that a school perhaps would award any of its students. However, there are exceptions, and there can be some special scholarships out there that might have a whole different application level, application process, as well as different deadlines. For example, I know that USC, if you want to apply to, or if you're hoping to get one of their scholarships, you need to have your application in by December 1st, which is much earlier than their regular decision deadline. So USC wants to see it earlier, and other schools do as well. So if you're interested in scholarship or grant money, you need to pay very close attention to the different deadlines and application processes that might be involved. All right, so we're going to talk right here about all the different factors that can go into merit aid. And I do want to bust a few myths about it. First of all, a lot of people think that all schools offer merit aid. However, that is definitely not true. Merit aid is not offered at any Ivy League schools, for example. People often think that it is truly based on merit, and it's not necessarily. And people often think that only the highest achieving students receive merit aid. However, there are institutions out there that are giving merit aid awards to students who have quite a wide range of GPAs and academic achievements and extracurricular activities and standardized test scores. There really is a broad range. So gift aid can be awarded based on so many different factors. It can be financial need, it can be academic excellence, it could be athletic, musical, theatrical talent. You could be affiliated with a various group. You could have particular career aspirations. And very often in this day and age, the merit aid that you are being offered might be given to you because the institution really wants you for a particular reason. So every year, institutions have specific goals that they are trying to achieve, and often they need students to help them fulfill these goals. And so simply put, it could be just as easy as they need a trombone player this particular year, or they need more classics majors. I cannot tell you how many times that has come up in the last few months. Apparently there is quite a drought of classics majors out there. So if you have a student interested in that, I would say that's a really good thing. Lots of schools need more classics majors. So there really can be so many reasons why a student might receive merit aid that's truly outside of anything to do with their academic GPA. Okay, it's time to sort of put it all together. So I'm going to take a sip of water and you guys can let your eyes look at this financial aid award letter. All right, this is coming from Whitman College, which is a small liberal arts college in Walla Walla, Washington. And this letter really conveys pretty directly the majority of the factors that we've been discussing. And I have to say this financial aid award letter is pretty clear to read. So many of the ones that you're going to see when your student starts getting their acceptance letters they're just going to be wild looking. There is absolutely no standardization in the way schools have to present financial aid to the parents and the families. So it can be challenging to figure them out, but this one is very clear. So first, I want you to note the cost of attendance, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner. So a year at Whitman will cost just under $64,000. Then over to the right-hand side, I want you to see that the total EFC, which they nicely explain is the expected family contribution right up above, is just over $7,000. So Whitman used the formula financial need is cost of attendance minus EFC. So this student, in order to come to Whitman, has a need of over $56,000. So where is this money going to come from? First, want to point out lines E and F. There are actually two E's. So this student was eligible to receive a direct subsidized loan, but then they are also eligible to take out the additional amount for an unsubsidized loan. This student is also eligible for some federal work-study funds, so they can head to campus and work and receive up to $2,500. So that is the self-help category of funding for this particular student. Up above in line D, this student was actually eligible for a federal Pell Grant. So that is money that does not need to be repaid. That is a gift from the government. And lines A, B, and C are all examples of institutional aid. So this is all scholarship money that Whitman College is providing to this student to encourage the student to come to Whitman, and it is all money that does not need to be repaid. So that is in excess of $40,000. Yeah, in excess of $40,000. Sorry, I didn't do the math ahead of time, but that is a very good chunk of money that is being given directly to the student that does not need to be repaid. All right, so one thing I want you to take a look at, though, is line 2 is the total award. That is $53,600. So when you take a look at all the scholarships the student's been offered, as well as all of that self-help categories and the other grants, we're looking at $53,600. But if we go back down to the bottom, the family's financial need was $56,605. So there is a gap of $3,035. And this is additional money that the family will need to come up with in addition to their expected family contribution. So that adds up to the total cost of attending Whitman College for this particular student. So not only do they need to take their expected family contribution into consideration, but also this gap. And so that is a very important term to know, and it's gapping. So not all schools are able to meet 100% of your demonstrated need. There are actually only 60 schools out there that are committed to meeting 100%. And you can see the numbers increase a little bit. So there are a total of 130 colleges out there that are meeting at least 85% of your demonstrated need. So there are a lot of schools out there that are not fully funding and bringing you, bringing the dollar amount up to, where you might need it to be in order to comfortably attend that school. All right, so what can we do about that? We need to work on creating a financially balanced college list. And what I want you to make sure you walk away understanding is that different schools have different financial aid objectives. Some schools out there really focus on giving their institutional aid to those students who have a lot of demonstrated financial need. On the other hand, there are schools that are focused more on giving out merit aid scholarships to families who might not have as much financial need. And these schools are often using their funds to encourage certain types of students to enroll at their school. Now, this really doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the school or the quality of the education that your student is going to get. It is simply a different institutional priority for the school. This particular resource was an absolute revelation to me when I saw it the first time, because what it does is it basically explains what I was just talking about. It is going to help us understand which schools are meeting a high amount of families' demonstrated need, or are they offering a large percentage of undergraduate students merit aid? And additionally, how much merit aid are these schools giving out? Okay, so I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom to Whitman. So bear with me while I find that. Okay. And in my screenshot, it was much tinier. So I apologize, it might be a little hard to see, but hopefully you can find Whitman College on the screen. And you can see that the first column, and I'll explain what these are since we don't have the headers anymore, the $69,000, that's the total cost of attendance. Our next field is the number of students who are enrolled at Whitman, so it's a small school. 94% is the average amount of demonstrated need that Whitman College generally provides to its students. So when we looked at that example before, when there was a $3,000 gap, that was essentially, when I did the math and the calculations, that was around 93, 94%. So Whitman College did a pretty good job of sticking with their statistics, and they offered that student, they came up with and found pretty much close to 94% of that student's demonstrated need. Now, our next column where it says 70% for Whitman, it actually is the number of students, the percentage of students who actually receive merit aid at Whitman. So that's a very large number of students who are receiving merit aid at this particular college. And then the next field over there tells us the average amount awarded by merit aid. So it's almost $13,000. So Whitman College does a pretty good job of not only meeting demonstrated need, but also providing a very large percentage of their campus with merit aid, and then doling it out at pretty decent levels. And then right next to that, where it says FM and IM, that stands for federal methodology and institutional methodology. And what that is federal methodology means that this school looks at the FAFSA as well as institutional methodology, which is the CSS profile. So what type of schools should be on your list? If you have a low expected family contribution, you have substantial demonstrated financial need. What you're going to want to do is find schools on that list, the one that I just shared, that do a really good job of meeting most of your demonstrated need. Or you want to have a strategy of making sure that you have schools that have a more reasonable, lower cost of attendance. If you have a high expected family contribution, then you have little to no demonstrated financial need. You are going to want to target and make sure that your student has on their list some schools that do a good job of offering merit aid money that's not based on financial need. Or again, you want to have some more affordable options. So schools where the cost of attendance perhaps is not as high. And if you have moderate need, you will be served well by taking a look at schools that not only meet a pretty good percentage of your demonstrated need, but also have merit aid as well. I've got a shorter amount of data here for you to check out. And so I want to highlight a few schools on here that would be really good choices for a student who has a low expected family contribution and therefore has great financial demonstrated need. So if we take a look at a couple of columns here, where there are actually 3 schools on this short abbreviated list here that actually meet 100% of the demonstrated need for their students. That is Northwestern, it is Oberlin, which is a college and conservatory in Ohio. Northwestern was in Illinois. It's actually my alma mater, as well as Occidental College, which is a small liberal arts college in the Los Angeles area. So those schools have different admittance rates. They're attracting different types of students. They are all, wonderful academic institutions, and they all have an institutional priority of meeting 100% of demonstrated need for their students. Now, schools that might be good choices for a student who needs merit aid, what I'm going to do on this chart is look for schools that offer a large percentage of their students to receive merit aid. Actually, on the very bottom, I see that Oglethorpe actually offers 100% of their undergraduates receive merit aid. And the next field over tells me that they're receiving almost on average $24,000. Some other schools that are good would be Oberlin again, actually. So Oberlin not only does a great job meeting financial need, but also of awarding merit aid. They provide 70% of their undergraduates with merit aid. And again, a pretty generous amount of, $17,500. I would say even a category, something where there's 55% or 44% up above with Northern Arizona or Northeastern. Those are all, I would say, considered to be generous schools in the terms of awarding merit aid. Because I think you can see something like a New York University, which is at the very top. They only award 8% of their students, undergraduate students, receive merit aid, and a pretty low amount, especially considering NYU is $75,000 a year. NYU also historically does not do a very good job of meeting demonstrated need either. So if you have a student who's interested in New York University, they perhaps are only going to come back with, meeting 65% of your demonstrated need. And there's a pretty low chance of merit aid at a school like NYU. So there are schools, when you take a look at this list, where you'll see fall into that category. Okay, I think that overall, I want to emphasize that financial fit is truly the goal here of my conversation. So the past few weeks, I've really been focusing on academic fit and social fit. And at this point, I really want you to understand that truly having the financial conversation with your student is absolutely vital. And you need to have it, especially if you're a senior building your college list. That conversation needs to happen now. Even if you have a younger student, it's good to have this conversation in the early stages, so you know what your budget is and you know what kind of expectations to establish for your student. This can be a really hard conversation to have if you wait until the acceptance letters are arriving and then you find out that you don't really have any colleges in your list that are affordable for your particular family's financial situation. I want to emphasize again that you always, always have the right to call the financial aid office and ask questions. They are there to help you and to serve you. After all, if you're going to be their student, they are there to help you. Some key points for this year, as 2020 I know has been a hardship for many families, and it's going to be exceptionally different from their 2019. So as we talked before, your 2019 is the tax information you're going to be putting on the FAFSA and perhaps the CSS profile, and perhaps things have really changed for you. Even in minor ways, it's important to note if 2020 is different. You definitely need to call financial aid early on to discuss the type of documentation that they would like to look at in order to reassess your situation, because that is completely within your right to ask them to do, and it is something that they are capable of doing. I also want to let you know that families can appeal financial aid award decisions after they arrive. So perhaps you're, March comes and you've got all your financial aid award letters. There are ways to appeal financial aid decisions and to have a conversation with a financial aid office to see if there's any way to get more money. So sometimes families will do this, say if they get one scholarship that's higher at another school, perhaps they'll call the financial aid office at the school they really want to go to and see if they can match that particular scholarship. It doesn't always happen, but you'll never know unless you ask. So if it's an institution that you truly want to go to and they have not necessarily met your financial need with what you need, then you can call and see if there's any other ways that they can help you out. All right, it looks like that took us right until, that was exactly an hour. So I want to thank you all for coming this evening and for sticking with me. I know this was a long presentation. There was a lot of information. I hope that you learned a lot, and I want you to want to make sure you know that I'm here if you have any questions. You all have my email since I've been emailing you the Zoom link, and you can certainly follow up with any questions. And my co-host will be uploading this recording, and so I can put that up on my YouTube channel, and I will compile a large resource document similar to ones I've shared in the past with you to help you along this financial aid journey. There are definitely a lot of tools out there that I hope you can all take advantage of using so that you can make intelligent decisions when it comes to building a financially balanced college list. Okay, well, I think I'm going to sign off for this evening. I hope that you all stay well, stay healthy, and thank you. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.